Consumers are becoming more savvy, and clinically proven as a claim it's not a free pass. Without context, it basically means nothing now. So you either defend your position with real evidence or someone else will take it.
Welcome to Off Protocol, the podcast that takes a closer look at the world of clinical trials. I'm your host, Meri, co-founder, CEO of Lindus Health. Each episode will pull back the curtain on clinical research, exploring what works, what doesn't, and what happens when things go a little off protocol. Today, we're diving into the space where consumer and science meet, the world of consumer health. If you've ever been at a pharmacy or a store and looked at a health supplement or over-the-counter products, you'll see words like clinically proven or contributes to the maintenance of condition X. What do those words really mean, and how do brands make sure that those claims are more than just marketing, that they're backed by science? Joining me is Malcolm Fogarty, who spent over 2 decades shaping consumer brands, most recently at Haleon and GSK Consumer Health. In our conversation, he shares how evidence generation from well-designed studies builds consumer trust in OTC products, and why sound science has become the cornerstone of brand and marketing strategy. So, Malcolm, big welcome. To start, can you tell us a bit about your career in the consumer health space and how you've seen the industry evolve?
Thanks, Meri. Yeah, well, I've spent over 20 years in actually venture building, consumer brand marketing, and more recently within consumer health and health tech at GSK Consumer Health, and then spinning out Haleon, which is actually the world's largest fast-moving consumer health company. And there I was heading up a function called Next, which is all about uncovering unmet consumer needs and developing new solutions and services that were essentially beyond the pill. So above and beyond, potions and pills and lotions that Haleon, which sells the likes of category-leading therapeutic oral health brands like Sensodyne and Advil, etc. It was all about uncovering and launching and scaling health tech and digital health solutions and services. I think that's where we first came across each other, Meri and Lindus. Really liked your approach, and that's developed into a good relationship. And I'm also doing some advisory work for Lindus today. I guess on the subject of consumer health, I think the category's much broader now than even when I started, which is 5 or 6 years ago. It's not just medicines or therapeutic products anymore. It's supplements, it's wearables, it's functional health products, simple digital tools and preventative solutions. So it's much broader than, I guess, even the terminology kind of OTC or over the counter and self-care. One big shift has been this, what's called OTC switch, so over the counter switch. So taking a medicine from prescription to over the counter. And that forces you to make everything clearer. Labels, people can actually understand, proof that it's safe when people use it on their own. But I guess here's the thing is that consumers have much more choice than ever, and that can be pretty overwhelming. So now I guess decisions happen right at the moment of purchase. That can be online or in the aisle. People can scan barcodes with their phone or check ChatGPT or Gemini, check with their pharmacists or read reviews. You have to kind of validating claims, checking side effects, all in real time. And in that world, evidence becomes your real edge. It supports your pricing, gets you to market faster, makes those retailer conversations easier, and builds trust that lasts. So the brands that lead don't kind of hide behind vague clinically tested claims. They show how the product actually performs in real life, and they do that quickly.
Yeah, I hadn't actually considered the extent to which evidence is useful for retailer sales channels as well as consumers. Would love to follow up on that in a second. I also want to touch on the RX to OTC switch. Yeah, that's been a really interesting trend. What do you think's driven the rise of that in the last decade or so?
It's the consumerization of healthcare products and services, the ability with the right backing and safety protocols to be able to take those products and therapeutics outside of a traditional pharmacy setting and into the likes of a Boots or a Walgreens or a CVS so that consumers have more choice, the ability for them to be able to self-care or administer it for themselves, as health and wellness products, become more consumerized. Then there's been an opportunity to, obviously, from a business generation perspective, broaden that beyond just prescription. So if you can do that in a way that's safe and accessible, then that's been a trend that certainly, bigger companies like GSK Consumer Health, now Haleon, we've seen the likes of Sanofi and Opella obviously kind of spin out their consumer division and with more self-care and over-the-counter products, as well as Johnson & Johnson and Kenvue and others. So the world of OTC is only increasing and giving better access to consumers for the products that are right for them, and
Yeah.
therefore they're kind of putting some of the power and decision making in their hands rather than purely the doctors or the pharmacists.
Nice. Um, and yeah, I'm also interested in this trend, as you've mentioned, of science-backed evidence becoming a differentiator. When did that start? And is this a recent development, or is this something that's been brewing for decades?
I guess it depends. If from a Haleon perspective, obviously it's a legacy coming from GSK, which is a pharma business, and obviously there was a lot of different businesses that consolidated. So there's a history of science-backed therapeutic products there. So that's nothing new. I think in today's world, where we've heard terms like the great supplement swindle and choice paralysis in terms of different consumer healthcare products and services, consumers are starting to and have become much more savvy to
Yeah.
Efficacy claims. Social media, I guess, hasn't helped because there's a plethora of new brands that are emerging overnight. And in some cases, they're looking to kind of make hay while the sun shines. And in some cases, signing up to subscription services or memberships. And there's a lot of debate, good and bad, whether some of these products are efficacious or actually work. So science and science-backed, rigor and science-backed studies is becoming increasingly important because consumers are actually starting to demand it. They're starting to actually read the labels, read the packaging, consult with doctors, online clinical influencers, and obviously speak to each other. So in a way, social media, for example, has been a double-edged sword. One, it's driving more access to this kind of a plethora of different solutions and services, which, as I said, kind of creates a bit of choice paralysis and confusion. But I think evidence and science-backed evidence has become brand equity and a competitive differentiator. And hopefully we'll continue to see that for the products and the brands that will win through.
I mean, yeah, anyone now can start a OTC supplements business with, a couple of grand of working capital and rudimentary knowledge of social media marketing,
Yep.
and it's just so easy to yeah, to overwhelm consumers. So yeah, maybe a good pivot to start talking about evidence generation. Obviously, this is a space we live and breathe at Lindus Health. We help consumer health companies, like some of the folks you mentioned, run faster, more efficient studies, but also access a wider breadth of data to help support those claims. Everything from pharma grade RCT clinical trials through to real world evidence, consumer perception. So when we talk about evidence generation in consumer health, could you maybe go into more detail about what that actually looks like, what kind of evidence is used, and maybe how that evidence differs from the type of data we'd look at in a traditional pharma prescribed drug setting?
Yeah, well, I guess traditional pharma approaches don't typically fit OTC or self-care or consumer. Typically kind of timelines can drag, budgets can explode. I know we have a value proposition at Lindus that looks to solve that, but everything assumes kind of perfect, ideal use in a controlled setting, typically within pharma. And I've seen really strong products stall because the evidence approach wasn't necessarily designed for this reality. So the emergence of real world evidence and real world data has certainly helped. And what consumer health needs is something different. You still ask a clear question and follow a solid plan. You still need enough people in the study to matter, but you don't necessarily need pharma scale everything. The shift is from doing kind of one massive study to building a repeatable system and something that balances speed, reasonable cost, real credibility, and staying on the right side of regulations, which is where, as I said, RWE, real world evidence, new innovations in the real world that reflects how people interact in their real lives, whether that's through their phone or wearables or point of purchase, are ways that we can generate evidence in a much more innovative and realistic way that maybe wasn't possible a number of years ago. And certainly that was a big shift for us when I was at Haleon. Everything that I was working on was around new innovative solutions, largely around kind of health tech as opposed to consumable products. And I remember the way that we were using RWE really resonated all the way up to kind of heads of R&D, senior executives, which gave us a license to do things differently and work with partners other than the usual big CROs to do studies and evidence generation in a much more agile and realistic manner, which is really exciting, because particularly when you're looking to maybe validate a business case or go through the stage gated processes of innovation and kill stuff quickly and move things that are working through the gates, then the ability to be able to gather evidence and use data rather than conjecture quickly really makes a difference. And as I said, it gives you a competitive edge, certainly when it comes to launching new products and when they're in the market.
Yeah, that's super interesting because, as someone who has one foot in both in the worlds of sort of traditional pharma and in more fast-moving consumer tech worlds, it's crazy to me. It's always been crazy to me how, in basically any other category, you would, rapid iteration and prototyping is the name of the game. You want to be able to test and iterate and do that as many cycles as possible. And that's how, every great software product was built, every great consumer product. And then in the world of traditional pharma, you test and iterate 3 times, right? In
Yeah.
humans in phase one, two, and three. And so yeah, I can see how in the consumer health space, being able to do that, being able to test and iterate faster and doing it safely is paramount. I just wanted to zoom in on RWE because, you know, this obviously it's a very woolly term. It can mean everything from retrospective registry-based studies to more prospective studies. Could you maybe just give a couple of examples of RWE data that you've seen be useful when it comes to validating consumer health products?
Yeah. I guess real world evidence, I guess it's just tracking how your product performs when people use it normally. At least that's my experience of it.
Yeah.
So, as I said, not in some controlled lab setting, but in everyday life. And more often than not, you don't need huge budgets for this. You can tap into people, consumers who've got mobile phones with devices, trackers, etc., even connected tills at point of purchase or customer services interactions. I mean, there's, at least from my perspective, so quick mobile surveys to see if your label makes sense to people, check-ins after they buy, maybe at 1 week and 1 month. There's lots of different opportunities and access points there. I've seen things like optional tracking from wearables or phones for things like sleep quality or pain, looking at patterns and what customers are asking, as I said, their support team or the company support team. So for things like, I guess, supplements and functional health products, this is a fast, kind of practical way to build confidence, and it captures what actually matters. How fast people feel better, whether they stick to it, whether they're using it correctly, and yeah, there's an ever increasing number of touch points and ways that kind of real world evidence can be used in a very agile and real world way that can have dramatic impact on how you recruit and also generate that evidence.
Yeah, I think the recruitment point is really interesting because what we've seen in some of the consumer health trials we've run is because you're dealing with conditions that are often managed by participants at home, being able to find and recruit those participants either at like the point of purchase for a consumer health product or at the point at which they're sort of naturally looking for a solution becomes a massive advantage.
Yeah, I was going to say like um, you might run a focused clinical study for your main claim, but then layer in real world tracking to see how it's performing after launch. That's
Mm,
another way. So kind of use digital tools to recruit people and collect data remotely, so you're not kind of dragging timelines ahead. But the key is making it repeatable. So you kind of don't reinvent the wheel for every product, but maybe one solid approach you can reuse across different products and markets. And obviously, Linda's has a lot of best practice there. And then the more that we partner with our partners and our clients, then we can build in those repeatable best practices across their pipeline of solutions or portfolio. And that means you can move faster and in some cases going to spend less per claim. So I
yeah.
guess brands that systemize this don't just move faster, they kind of build a real competitive advantage and arguably going to set the pace for their whole category.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but what we've seen be particularly helpful is you kind of want to rely on sites as little as possible. Firstly, because a lot of these conditions are kind of managed by participants at home, or they're not using prescribed treatments, they're using OTC treatments. And so, having that discipline of being able to recruit participants at point of purchase or direct through like a central recruitment campaign has been key to basically all of the consumer health trials we've done.
And
So
Mary, what stands out for you in terms of effective use of real world evidence and something that, yeah, you'd like to see as almost a standard in terms of best practice going forward?
ooh, yeah, great question. I think in general, as much like ambient data as possible, by which I mean data from wearables or other like sources that are as unobtrusive as possible. There's definitely like a measurement effect in all clinical research, but if you sort of ask a consumer every day, oh, how are your X symptoms, or think about Y activity, it's going to affect their behavior and how they respond to a treatment. So yeah, so as much data as we can get, in a sort of ambient or unobtrusive way. So like very sort of light touch questionnaires that are
Yeah.
very easy for participants to answer, or data from wearables, is a great fit for this space.
And are there any are there any examples or stories where like a brand learned something unexpected that kind of completely changed their approach?
Yeah, so I think I can share this. So one of our earliest studies actually was with a company called Myota, and they have a very cool prebiotic fiber supplement. And it's a very interesting consumer health product because, it's technically not a drug, but and this data has been published in the British Journal of Nutrition now, the study we ran with them, so I can talk about all this freely. In the clinical study we ran with them, we recruited participants with pre-diabetes, so with a very specific pre-diabetic blood sugar range. And those participants saw much better blood sugar control after using Myota's fiber supplement. And so this enabled them to make health claims or substantiate health claims around people with pre-diabetes, helping them maintain healthy blood sugar, which is pretty cool, right? I mean,
Mm.
it's probably as far as you can push something without it tipping into a drug claim about treating type 2 diabetes. And
Yeah.
this is just a supplement product. But to actually answer your question, they did find some really cool stuff just from the some of the survey or the questionnaire data we asked participants. So Myota's product is a fiber supplement
Yep.
with quite a large volume. And one of their challenges had been how do they get participants to consume enough of this? And what we found consistently in the study was that participants were reporting like, oh, if I mix it with yogurt, it tastes really nice. It,
Yeah.
makes the yogurt taste better. And so,
Mhm.
so since then, I think they're looking into how they can incorporate it into like yogurt products. And that's something that they
Yeah.
probably wouldn't have found if they hadn't had a structured way of asking participants about it. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I think um, increasingly, I think we're kind of seeing supplements or functional health brands looking at kind of the claim, writing the claim first, and then it's, I guess it's kind of building a simple plan to back it up and keeping it clear and kind of easy to find. But it's interesting to see if that somehow changes for better or for worse as a result of real world evidence in the market. But yeah, I think we're seeing an increase of that where it's kind of claim first and then build the evidence plan around it, and then even the marketing and creative to back that up. And assuming that goes successfully or good, but it's surprising what you might find in the real world from real consumers or patients.
Yeah. So Malcolm, in your view, what's the biggest misconception about clinical evidence in this consumer space?
Well, as I mentioned, consumers are becoming more savvy, and clinically proven as a claim it's not a free pass. Without context, it basically means nothing now. So real proof is specific, who it helps, what changes, how fast, how much, and it has to hold up when someone scans the barcode or Googles you or asks AI, or when the FTC come knocking. So you either defend your position with real evidence, yeah, or someone else will take it. So as I said earlier, evidence and rigor becomes your brand equity, becomes a competitive differentiator. So it's important that there's real rigor behind the claims and the studies and detail, rather than just the kind of clinically proven tag, which no longer stacks up.
Yeah, cool. Well, I think that's a good segue for me to ask the final question, which was, would love your take on how you see the role of evidence evolving in consumer health. Um, you know, we've seen the FDA make noises about becoming more strict with their enforcement of health claims, but do you see that continuing, especially with the new administration? Do you see a future where every OTC product will need clinical backing?
Um, I guess for meaningful claims, yes. I guess matched to what they're actually promising. And consumers are getting savvier. As I said, they're using AI, they're checking with health professionals online, they're reading reviews, and the FTC, FDA is cracking down on what they call supplement swindle, as I mentioned earlier on. So
Yeah.
and to your point, or I mentioned earlier, retailers want more proof before they'll stock you as well.
Yeah.
So there's multiple stakeholders, shall we say, that we need to build trust and compliance with. So I guess the winners won't just run one study and call it done. They'll build as I said, maybe a repeatable system. So, new claims are faster to earn and easier to defend and consistent everywhere they sell. And I guess that's not, about cutting corners. It's about removing friction, building one kind of solid approach you can reuse. And hopefully that results in faster claims, lower costs, and stronger stories everywhere your product shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, sounds great for the companies that can harness that, and definitely for consumers to help them make sense of all the noise that's out there.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, Malcolm, thank you so much for joining me. It's been fascinating hearing how clinical evidence, communication, and consumer trust kind of all intersect in this world. So, yeah, really appreciate you sharing your insights. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please subscribe, share the episode, and let us know what you'd like us to explore next. So until next time, I'm Meri Beckwith, and this is Off Protocol. Thank you very much.